Well now, pull up a chair. Let that evening sun warm your face a spell. The name's Earl McKenna. Some folks around the docks just call me Earl. I've been married to the sea for the better part of my life, more than 50 years now, and she's a fickle bride. She gives and she takes. Most of the stories I have are etched right here in the lines on my face and the knots in my hand. They smell of salt, diesel, and some of them are best told when the tide is low and the light is fading. You care to listen to an old man's ramblings? Good. Then let me tell you about a day the sea didn't feel like talking. It just wanted to show me something. It started like any other Tuesday in late autumn. The air had that sharp, clean bite to it, the kind that promised cold nights, clear sky. The water was a sheet of hammered lead, barely a ripple to disturb the reflection of a sky the color of a pale robin's egg. I was out on the Matilda, my sturdy old trawler, named her after my late wife. Both of 'em were stubborn, dependable, and knew how to handle a storm better than I did. I wasn't out for a big haul, just enough to keep the lights on and my mind occupied. There's a certain kind of peace you can only find when the land is a faint, hazy line on the horizon, and the only sounds are the thrum of your engine and the lonely cry of a gull. I was maybe 10 miles offshore, in a spot that's always been good to me when I saw it. At first it was just shape, a smudge against the clean line where the sea met the sky. It wasn't moving right. A boat with its engine running a clean wake. A sailboat catches the wind with purpose. This thing, it was just drifting, aimless, like a cork in a bathtub. That's the first thing that puts a prickle on the back of your neck out here. Anything without purpose is usually in trouble. I cut my engine back to a low grumble and steered the Matilda in for a closer look. As I got nearer, I recognized the vessel. It was the Sea Serpent, a fine boat, a little smaller than mine but well kept. Belonged to Ernest, a fellow fisherman I'd known for 30 years. A man as steady as a lighthouse beam. Quiet, never one for boasting, and he knew these waters like the back of his own calloused hand. He'd had a young lad working with him for the past year, Matthew. Good kid, eager to learn, strong back, didn't talk your ear off. "Ernest! Matthew!" I hollered, my voice sounding thin and small in the vast quiet. "You boys having engine trouble?" No answer. The silence that came back was heavier than before. It seemed to press in on me. I circled the Sea Serpent slowly. Everything looked fine. The nets were stowed neatly. No signs of damage to the hull. The outriggers were in place. It was just empty. A ghost ship basking in the afternoon sun. The only movement, a gentle, lazy rocking from the placid swell of the ocean. An empty coffee mug was sitting on the railing right where someone had left it. It was a detail so normal it was terrifying. My gut told me something was deeply wrong. A man doesn't abandon his boat in calm seas, not a man like Ernest. I brought the Matilda alongside, my fenders kissing the hull of the Sea Serpent with a soft sigh. I tied them off, and with a groan from my old knees, I climbed aboard. The deck was clean, washed down with seawater. It was an orderly boat, but the stillness was unnatural. The air felt thick, holding its breath. I called their names again, my voice tight in my throat. The only reply was the gentle slap of water against the hull. I peered into the small cabin. The door was ajar. Pushing it open, I saw a scene that froze the blood in my veins. On the small fold-out table, 2 plates of food sat unfinished. A piece of fried fish on one, a fork halfway through a potato on the other. A thermos of coffee was uncapped, a faint wisp of steam still rising from it in the cool air. It was a meal interrupted mid-bite. On the edge of the table, resting in an ashtray, was Ernest's pipe. I reached out a hesitant finger and touched the bowl. It was still warm. My heart started to beat a heavy, slow drum against my ribs. They hadn't just left. They had vanished. 1 second, they were here, eating lunch, living their lives in the next. They were gone. I checked the rest of the small cabin. Their slickers were hanging on their hooks. 2 sets of boots were tucked under the small bunk. Everything was in its place. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs, nothing broken. It was as if the men themselves had simply evaporated. I backed out of the cabin, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the chill in the air. My eyes scanned the deck, the empty sea all around us. Where could they have gone? A rogue wave? No, the sea was flat as a pane of glass and everything on the boat secure. Did they both fall overboard at the same time? Unlikely. Ernest was as sure-footed as a mountain goat, even in a gale. A medical emergency? Maybe. But what could take 2 men, one old and one young, so fast they couldn't even send out a radio call? The radio was on, humming quiet, waiting for a voice that would never come. Then I saw, lying on the console next to the compass, the ship's logbook. It was a simple, sturdy-looking book with a blue canvas cover, its pages filled with Ernest's neat, practical handwriting. Fishermen are creatures of habit. We log the weather, the coordinates, the size of the catch. It's a record of our days, a testament to our work. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd find a clue inside, an explanation. Anything was better than this heavy, suffocating mist. I picked it up. The cover felt cool and damp in my trembling hands. I opened it, my thumb brushing past pages of routine entry. October 12th. Wind out of the northwest, 10 knots. Good haul of cod. Matthews learning the nets. October 13th. Calm seas. Fog rolled in around noon. Slow day. It was the mundane, comforting rhythm of a fisherman's life. I kept turning the pages, my breath catching in my chest. The last few entries were different. The handwriting was a little less steady. October 15th. Something's been following, just a shadow under the keel, big, faster than any shark I've ever seen. Matthew saw it too. He spooked. My blood ran cold. Ernest wasn't a man for flights of fancy. October 16th. It's still there. We don't see it, but we feel it. A strange vibration through the hull when the engine is off. The water feels heavy. Pulled in the nets early, heading back at first light. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry as dust. I turned to the last page. There was only one entry, scrawled in a rushed, almost illegible script. The date was for today. The ink was barely dry. It wasn't a long ink. Just 3 short sentences that would come to haunt my waking hours and my dreams. 3 sentences that unraveled the world as I knew it. The fog came, heard a scraping on the hull. It climbed on board. I stood there on the deck of that silent boat for a long time, the logbook heavy in my hand like a stone. The sun was starting to dip lower, painting the undersides of the few thin clouds in hues of orange and purple. It was the kind of sunset that usually filled an old man's heart to peace. But not that day. That day, the beauty of it felt like a lie, a pretty mask on a terrible face. Every shadow on the water looked deeper. Every ripple seemed to hide something. The words from the logbook were burned into my mind. It climbed on board. A rational man would have called the Coast Guard right then and there. He would have reported the vessel, handed over the logbook, and let the authorities handle the mess. But I've been on the sea long enough to know there's the world of men and their laws, and then there's the world of the ocean. They don't always follow the same rules. What would I have said? Yes, sir. Ernest and the boy are gone. According to this book, a monster from the deep came up and took them. They'd have looked at me like I was a senile old fool. They'd clap me on the shoulder, thank me for my service, and then they'd whisper about me behind my back at the dock. Old Earl's finally lost his bearings. Too much sun, too much solitude. No, this felt different. This felt like a secret the sea had whispered to me, and it wasn't my place to shout it from the rooftops. It was a secret Ernest had paid for with his life, and it felt like a betrayal to turn his last terrified words into a piece of public mockery. I closed the logbook, a knot tightening in my gut. I slipped it inside my jacket, the canvas cover feeling cold against my chest. I would tell them I found the boat empty. That was the truth. The rest was mine. The journey back to port, the longest of my life. Towing the Sea Serpent was slow work. The boat felt like a dead weight behind me, and I don't just physically. It was a ghost I was dragging back to shore, a piece of a nightmare tethered to my stern. The sun finally sank below the horizon, and the stars began to pop out in the deepening twilight, cold and impossibly far away. I kept my eyes on the sea around me, my hand rarely straying from the throttle. Every splash against the hull made me jump. Every dark shape in the water was, split second, more than just a wave. I felt watch. The feeling was so strong, so primal, it was like a physical pressure on my skin. I didn't dare turn off my engine. The silence was something I couldn't face. When the lights of the harbor finally appeared, a faint glow in the distance, I felt a wave of relief so powerful my knees were weak. But it was followed by a fresh wave of dread. Now came the had to lie mission. Vance, the harborman, was waiting for me on the dock, his face with worry in the yellow glow of the sodium. He'd seen me coming in slow, another boat in tow. He knew that was never a good sign. "Earl, what in blazes is going on? That's Ernest's boat. Where is he?" Vance was a good man, but he lived by ledgers and regulation. His world was black and white. "Found her adrift, Vance," I said, my voice hoarse. It's simple. 10, maybe 12 miles out. Not a soul on board. The news spread through the small fishing community like a fire through dry grass. By the time I had the Sea Serpent secured, a small crowd had gathered. Faces I'd known my whole life, all staring at the empty boat with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. They asked the same question over and over. "Did you see anything? Any sign of a struggle? Maybe they had a dinghy." I just shook my head, repeating the same sparse story. Looked like they just stepped off. Lunch was still on the table. And then the theories began. That's what people do when faced with a void. They try to fill it with stories they can understand. Micah, who'd lost a brother to a storm back in '88, was certain it was a rogue wave. Comes out of nowhere, Earl. A wall of water on a calm day. Could have washed 'em both right off the deck before they knew what hit 'em. Others nodded, finding comfort in that explanation. It was tragic, but it was a tragedy of the sea, something they could comprehend. Lucas, a younger fisherman with a cynical streak, offered another idea in a low voice. Could be the engine was leaking carbon monoxide. Happened to a boat up in Maine last year. 2 fellas just went to sleep and never woke up. A wave could have taken them after that. That theory also made the rounds. A plausible scientific reason for the impossible. The Coast Guard came, of course. They asked their questions, took their notes, and I told them the same thing I told everyone else. I never mentioned the logbook. I let them search the Sea Serpent from stem to stern. They found nothing out of place, nothing to explain the disappearance. They officially declared Ernest and Matthew lost at sea, and a heavy sadness settled over our little town. A memorial was held. People told stories about Ernest's skill as a fisherman and Matthew's bright future. I sat in the back, the weight of the logbook in my coat, feeling like a block of ice. I listened to their logical explanation, a comforting fiction, and I felt a profound and terrible loneliness. In the nights that followed, I'd sit in my small kitchen, the logbook open on the table under the single bare bulb. I read those last entries until I knew them by heart. A strange vibration through the hull. The water feels heavy, and those final, chilling words. I could almost hear Ernest's voice, cracking with a fear I couldn't imagine. He wasn't a man given to fantasy. If he wrote it, he believed it. And if he believed it, that's when it started for me. Small things at first. I took the Matilda out a few days later, needing the routine, the comfort of work. But the sea no longer felt like home. I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow in the depths that seemed to move with too much speed, too much purpose. I'd dismiss it, dolphin, or a trick of the light. The doubt would linger. One evening, I was anchored in a calm cove, the water still as a mill pond. There wasn't a breath of wind, and I heard it, a soft, wet, scraping sound from directly beneath my boat. Pause. Scratch. It was the sound of something dragging itself along my keel. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the heaviest wrench I had and stood there, staring at the floorboards, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound continued for maybe a minute, then stopped as suddenly as it began. I stayed up all night. A floodlight pointed at the water around my boat, seeing nothing but my own terrified reflection. The paranoia described in Ernest's logbook was no longer just his. It was becoming mine. I started to doubt my own senses. Was that the cry of a gull or something else? Was the fog rolling in naturally, or was it being drawn by my boat? The solitude I had once cherished now felt menace. The vast, open water was no longer a symbol of freedom, but of deep, terrible vulnerability. I realized I couldn't live like this, haunted by a ghost I hadn't even seen. The theories of the townsfolk were a comfort. They were a lie. I heard the truth, or at least a piece of it, tucked away in my jacket. Ernest had left one last clue, the coordinates from his final entry. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to go there. I had to go to the place where the Sea Serpent had met its end. Maybe I was a fool. Maybe I was sailing into the same fate that took Ernest and the boy. I had to know. I had to see for myself. The fear of the unknown was one thing, but the fear of what I was beginning to suspect was far, far worse. The decision to go back was not a brave one. It was born of something closer to desperation. You can't live with a ghost in your head. It whispers to you in the quiet hours, turns every creak of your house at night into a footstep, every shadow into a lurking shape. Ernest's fear had become a contagion, and that logbook was its carrier. Burning it wouldn't have helped. The words were already branded onto my memory. The only cure, I figured, was to face the sickness head on. I told no one where I was going. I simply loaded the Matilda with extra fuel and provisions, same as I would for any long trip. To any casual eye on the docks, it was just Earl McKenna heading out for a few days, but my hands weren't steady as I cast off the line. The familiar thrum of the diesel engine, usually a comfort, sounded like a drumbeat, marching me toward a fate I didn't want to meet. The coordinates from Ernest's logbook took me to a part of the ocean we called the graveyard, not because of ships, but because of the fish. It was an unnaturally deep trench, a place where the currents were treacherous, and the bottom was a tangled mess of rock formations that snag a net and drag a boat down if you weren't careful. Most of us avoided it. The fishing was poor, the risks. I couldn't imagine what would have drawn a seasoned fisherman like Ernest out there, unless he was chasing something big, or unless something big was chasing him. The journey took the better part of a day. As I drew closer to the coordinates, the character of the sea began to change. The water darkened from a deep blue to an unsettling inky black. The air grew still and heavy, charged with an energy that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. There were no gulls this far, no dolphins playing in the bowway. There was just the Matilda and a unnerving silence. And then, just as Ernest had written, the fog came. It wasn't a normal sea fog that rolls in gently. This stuff rose up from the water itself, swirling in thick, unnatural tendrils, as if the ocean was exhaling a cold, damp breath. Within minutes, the Matilda was encased in a world of gray. Visibility dropped to near zero. I could barely see the bow of my own boat. I cut the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute, deafening. The world shrank to the wet, dripping deck beneath my feet. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I stood at the helm, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel, and I listened. This was it. This was the place. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I I knew I was waiting. The boat drifted on a current I couldn't see, a ghost ship in a sea of vapor. Time seemed to stretch and warp in that fog. A minute could have been an hour. That's when I heard it. The same sound I'd heard in the cove, but louder, more distinct. Grab, drag, drag. It was coming from the hull, right below me. It was the sound of something immense and heavy moving against the wood, something with a rough, abrasive texture. I grabbed a gaff hook, my only weapon, its sharp steel point looking pitifully small. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Then the boat tilted. Not a gentle rock from a swell, but a sudden, deliberate lurch to the port side, as if a colossal weight had just been placed on the railing. Water sloshed over the side, soaking my boots. I stumbled, catching myself on the helm, my eyes wide with terror, staring into the thick gray mist. I heard a sound that wasn't a scrape. It was a wet, heavy, slapping sound, the sound of something impossibly large and slick pulling itself out of the water. It climbed on board. Ernest's words screamed in my mind. I couldn't see it through the fog, and for that I am eternally grateful. My mind, in its terror, tried to fill in the blanks, and what it conjured was worse than any monster from storybook. I could smell it, an ancient primal smell, like a deep-sea trench turned inside out, a smell of brine and decay. Something else, something metallic, utterly alien. The Matilda groaned under the strain. The weight on the port side was immense, tilting the deck at a terrifying angle. I could hear a slow, rhythmic sound that might have been breathing, a deep, wet, resonant exhalation that seemed to vibrate through the very air. I was paralyzed. Fight? Flee? How do you fight the ocean itself? How do you flee from something that has already boarded your vessel in the middle of nowhere? And in that moment of pure, undiluted terror, strange calm washed. I thought of Ernest and young Matthew. I imagined their final moments, the same sounds, the same tilting deck, the same suffocating fog. Panic. They must have fought, and they were gone. I realized then that I wasn't here to fight. You can't fight a hurricane, you can't fight a tidal wave, and you can't fight this. It was a force of nature, an ancient part of this world that had been here long before my boat, long before my grandfather's boat, long before men ever dared to venture. I lowered the gaff hook, letting it clatter to the deck. I stood up straight, facing the unseen present, and I simply waited. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood on the deck of my boat and accepted my fate. It was a strange kind of surrender, a kind of peace. I was a guest in its world, and I had overstayed my... I spoke, my voice a dry whisper in the oppressive silence. I mean you no harm. I had to know. I don't know if it heard me or understood me. I don't know if it even cared. But as I stood there, waiting for the end, the pressure on the boat began to ease. The deck slowly leveled out. There was another series of wet, heavy sounds, and then a tremendous splash that sent a spray of cold salt water across my face. And then silence. The oppressive weight in the air lifted. The unnatural presence was gone. I stayed frozen in place for what felt like an eternity, listening to the frantic beating of my own heart. Slowly, as if waking from a dream, the fog began to thin. Wisps of gray turned to translucent veils, and then the blessed, familiar sight of the horizon appeared. The sun was shining. The water was just water again, deep blue and indifferent. I was alone, truly alone. The trip home, blur. I don't remember much of it. I just remember the feeling of the sun on my skin and steady, reassuring chug of the Matilda's engine. When I finally reached my small house by the shore, I walked like a man twice my age. I went straight to the old iron stove in my living room, the one I use on the coldest winter nights. I took Ernest's logbook from my jacket. My hands were shaking, but my purpose clear. I didn't read the words again. I didn't need to. I opened the stove, struck a match, and lit the corner of the blue canvas cover. It caught fire slowly at first. Then the dry pages curled and blackened, turning Ernest's final, terrified testimony into gray ash. I watched until every last word was gone. I never told anyone the full story. I let them keep their comfortable theories of rogue waves and engine fumes. It's better that way. Some things the world isn't ready to know. The sea is deep, and it holds secrets we can't even begin to imagine. We just skim the surface, taking what we can. But every now and then the surface breaks, and you see what lies beneath. I saw it. I understood that Ernest and Matthew hadn't been attacked by a monster. They had simply stumbled into a truth that was too big for them, too big for any of us. Their sin wasn't malice or greed. It was curiosity. They looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back, and then it climbed on board. Now, the secret is mine to keep, a silent pact made with the deep, a weight I'll carry until the day the sea decides to claim me too. There are truths in the world so ancient and vast that they defy human understanding. Humility and respect for the unknown are sometimes the only true forms of wisdom. Not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are. I've got a lifetime of stories etched by the salt sun. If you've got a moment to listen, subscribe to our channel. The tide's always bringing in something new.